Hey, micro friends, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Micro. As always, I'm so happy that you're here with me. And if this is the first time listening to Let's Talk Micro, well, thank you for choosing it as one of your podcasts. Okay, so real quick in today's episode, I am joined by Kenzi Haigler, and she is an educator, a medical lab scientist who took the amazing initiative of starting a lab program in high school. That's right, you heard it, in high school. And in this program, the students will be exposed to instrumentation, lab concepts. So it's a very great way to start bringing awareness about the profession and an early jumpstart on building the workforce. And as you're listening, you know that we struggle with shortages in the workforce and on awareness about the profession. What a great initiative by Kenzie. And in the episode, she also talks about rural settings and how the lab works and some of the struggles that they have when it comes to workforce shortages. So this is such a great episode. Once again, shout out to Kenzie for doing this. So let's go ahead and listen to it. Hey, micro friends. As a microbiologist and medical lab scientist, I enjoy when I come across pages, people that are doing things to better this profession. As you know, there are many challenges that we have. Sometimes not too many programs, not too many students. We're understaffed, and it's always great when people are doing some sort of initiative to better that. And I do love it. And today is one of those episodes. Going through social media, I found this page, which is Lab Life with Mrs. H on TikTok. I've been following her for a while, and then I saw about this program, that had to do with the lab and high school, and I found it very interesting. So I reached out, and here we are today to talk about this. So with me today, I have Kenzi Haigler. Kenzi, welcome to Let's Talk Micro.
Thank you for having me.
Definitely a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time. Okay, so for the audience, maybe you can start with a little bit of an introduction, like telling us about your journey into the lab. And I know we're going to be talking about, your experience in rural healthcare. So maybe you can talk about all those things.
I feel like I've had an unusual journey into the laboratory because I grew up in a hospital. My mom and my grandma both worked nights as nurses, and I ended up sleeping in the nurses' lounge while growing up. That's obviously before OSHA would have ever approved of a kid hanging out on night shift. And then in college, I worked as a physical therapist tech, and I originally graduated with a degree in exercise science. And then I later on, I went back and got my associates in medical laboratory technician. Worked for a couple more years, and then I set for my MLS. And in May, I will be graduating with my master's in health science education. So I started out in Coaster City. My first grade class only had 6 kids in it. So my baseline has been rural. But now I live in Canton, where my son goes to school, and this is where I'm building the program. I did spend about 5 years at a larger regional hospital in Enid, working in a very busy, stressful environment. And then I moved back into smaller, more rural facilities. And now I'm at Oakey Municipal Hospital, where our local provider, Dr. Casey Brickman, hired me with a very specific problem, help find lab staff and bring everybody's training up to speed so that the lab could stay safe and open. And so I've started recruiting, onboarding, and coaching these new hires in this very tiny rural department. And I think that's what's grounded me into what the shortage actually looks like in our own front yard. Rural labs, uh, you're rarely just in the lab. Like on nights, if there's a trauma in the ER, you're actually in the room helping where you can. I'll never forget the times I've jumped in helping during codes or any other trauma events. And our patients are not just numbers on a tube. You see them in the streets, you see them at the grocery store. I mean, you know almost everybody. And it's that all hands on deck reality that's the backdrop for how I see the lab and why I care so much about building the pipeline out here.
Okay, and you talked about this a little bit, and definitely shortages, right? This profession is no stranger to shortages and big labs, smaller labs. And my experience has been mostly in large labs and some smaller ones, but nothing like rural. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that workforce shortage and how does it look like in rural settings on a day-to-day basis.
The laboratory workforce shortage, it shapes your entire day. Instead of us having a full team, you have with separate benches, you have one or two people covering our chemistry, hematology, blood bank, and even phlebotomy. And whatever else walks in, you're just simply that one person doing it. And that same tiny group rotates nights, weekends, days, and call. So you're never really truly off. And I feel like the managers are always living in this permanent puzzle mode, trying to patch the schedule and pray that no one's getting sick or leaving. One of our small rural hospitals, I think, is a great example. Years ago, I want to say like 30 or 40 years ago, they actually had already seen the shortage coming and they got creative and they had the radiology techs cross trained in lab and the lab cross trained in radiology. And I think that out of box thinking has kept our services open for a long time. But now that means those same few people are running the x ray, CT, and the lab work on top of call. I mean, it works until it doesn't, and there's just simply not enough lab professionals in the world to step in behind them. So on the ground, that looks like more tests being sent out to reference labs, our longer turnaround times on nights and weekends, and our techs are just burning out and they're physically exhausted, but they still show up because, like I said earlier, our specimens aren't just numbers, they're people. We know who they are. And I think the other sad thing, for one thing, is we have all these techs that are retiring after 40 or 50 years and it's not just an open position. I mean, that's decades of knowledge that's just walking out the door with no one ready to receive it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And and that's something that we kind of saw with COVID as well when COVID hit. And sometimes, some of the techs that had been working for a long time, they took that opportunity to go ahead and retire. Hey, some maybe were offered some incentive packages but overall, it's like, it's my time, time to step away. And we did lose all that rich, what we call like old school knowledge, that it's just, then we find ourselves, in a room with new techs, trying to pass all this knowledge and deal with all the changes in technology and things like that. But this is so eye opening. I mean, sometimes, some of us just stay in our department and that's all we do. And it's definitely stressing, right? People do get burned out, and not only the techs, right? And you mentioned the managers with their headaches and trying to fill the schedules, and that's also stressful. Anyone that's been a supervisor, you waking up and seeing a few text messages saying, "Hey, I'm not coming in today. Oh man, I was gonna train, I was gonna do this," so you have to shift, and it's you feel like even at home you cannot rest because you get text messages and things. So it's a lot of challenges, definitely. Okay. I mean, by now, I was gonna ask, but maybe if you have anything else to add, when it comes to those staffing shortages, right? Um, how do they impact the patient care or lab operations? You mentioned longer turnaround times. Anything else that you can add to this?
One thing I think is like our hospital's there to serve our community, right? And we're having to downsize our lab testing menu. And I feel like sometimes we're not able to serve our community the best we can because we're having to send it out to reference labs. And I feel like, man, if we could do more here locally, we'd be helping the metro labs too decrease their workload. That's the big impact for me. I feel like we could sometimes do better serving our communities with but more testing.
And as you mentioned, sometimes this classes, whether it's MLS, medical lab science programs, or MLT, medical lab technician, um, sometimes you do have those classes that you have 6 8 students, so the numbers definitely are low, right? So we only have typically a classroom has enough resources to push one class at a time. We cannot do like 2 or 3 like that. So from the get-go we already have low numbers. um what do you think that many graduates from traditional MLS programs don't end up working in rural communities?
So this is more from my experience and what I'm seeing in our area. I mean, a lot of the graduates, they're not ever seeing a real lab, so they don't picture themselves there. Their clinicals are usually at the large hospitals in metro areas with big teams, lots of resources, and those newer analyzers. And I think that becomes their mental picture of what a good lab job actually looks like. And so rural labs feel invisible or honestly a little intimidating by comparison. Uh, what people don't always see in the rural facilities are actually it's a gold mine learning environment. You're closer to the whole process. You see more of the patient's story from the start to finish, and you're often cross trained in ways that give you a much broader skill set than you would get if you're locked in a single bench in a huge lab. And on the education side, the universities are placing these students in big, large health systems because it's easier for them to have one contract versus multiple small contracts. And I get it. I mean, it's efficient, efficient and predictable, but it means that students are not seeing the small hospitals in towns like mine. And if you've never stepped into a rural facility as a student, it doesn't even cross your mind to apply there. There's also that real fear factor. I think students wonder, will I be the only one there? Will I have support or mentorship? If I go rural, will I get stuck? So by the time they graduate, their lives are already anchored around metro housing, their partner's jobs, or even their kids' school. So uprooting and moving to a small town feels even harder. And they also think that rural just isn't worthy. And it's that current pipeline that is set up so students see urban and suburban labs as a default and rural as something that they've never imagined themselves in.
Yeah, I can see, I can see that, and probably as a student thinking, right, it's definitely scary when you're about to go into the profession and thinking, okay, maybe here I'm gonna find myself perhaps alone. That's definitely a scary feeling of what do I do, right? It's always that big hospital. There's always that excuse me, there's always that comfort where, okay, something I don't know, I know I have maybe a senior tech, I have a manager, I have a supervisor, so it's like that little blanket of comfort that you're like, okay, it makes me relax a little more. So I can definitely see that. You mentioned a little bit of the pipeline, so right, so you're seeing all the staffing issues. So when do you start to realize that the issue wasn't just staffing but the pipeline into the profession?
So at first, I really did think it was mostly a staffing problem. Like we just need more people on the schedule. I think it took working in a few different settings and honestly, just growing up in my own career to see that it was a bigger problem. So in Enid, where that larger facility that I worked at, I saw the shortage up close. There was constant vacancies, heavy workload, and new hires who often didn't get to stay long because we were stretched too thin to train and support them the way they deserved. And I couldn't be mad at them for leaving because, I mean, we didn't have the depth of people there to train them, and it made the environment stressful. And then later on, when I went to teaching at the university, I realized that my own students were getting almost zero exposure to rural hospitals or small labs. Rural just wasn't part of the story that they were being told. And at the same time, our rural hospitals were coming to me saying, "Hey, we've been looking for somebody for over a year and I can't find anybody." And I was watching people like our rad techs, Aubrey Hafner and Kayla Streck at O'Keene, hold up both radiology and the lab because there was no one else to hand it off to. And that's around that same time as when Dr. Casey Brickman brought me in to help with the recruiting and training for the lab. So I was seeing the problem from both the education side and the employer side. And that's when I probably started digging into the research and saw the same pattern over and over. Most people end up practicing close to home where they train instead. And in a lot of studies, more than half the physicians stay in the same state as their residency. And in some programs, especially those tied with local ties, and that retention can hit 70% or more. So to me, if training location is that powerful, then we need to start training our rural students where here, and that would make a difference.
Okay. So tell us about your the program that you're working on. It's very interesting. We're seeing all initiatives where they offer certificates where people already have bachelor's degree and things like that, and outside of the traditional MLS MLT program. This one is like a lab program, but at the high school level, which is so interesting. So maybe can you tell us what that looks like?
Yeah, so I mean, the high school program, I mean, it started as my own grow our own idea in my hometown that just wouldn't leave my head. So where we live, logistics is a huge barrier. Getting real students to career tech centers or big hospitals every day just really isn't that realistic. So I started asking myself, what would it look like if I bring the lab to them instead? And right then, a nurse practitioner in our community, Beth Aker, she opened up a Main Street family clinic. And to me, I feel like that's when everything changed because suddenly I have this local partner, and my classroom is actually inside her clinic, which I think I love that fact. And it's not a big fancy lab, it's very small, and she does strictly weight testing. But we've been very intentional about choosing equipment that mirrors what our rural facilities use so that students see the tools that feel familiar when we walk into those hospitals later on. And I am starting from ground zero. I mean, I only have one microscope, a slide bureau for those old slides, and a couple of donated Clio waived analyzers. And I have lots of expired supplies from all my rural lab family. um, in that space, though, I am going to work with students on wave testing and classroom-based moderate complexity skills so they can grow into things like the urine microscopics or doing normal white blood cell differentials. So those concepts aren't going to be brand new and when they get hired on later on. Students will also get the exposure to swabbing patients, basic phlebotomy in the clinic before they ever step into the hospital. And a big design principle is protecting our already stressed out lab and burnt out lab staff. I don't want to drop untrained students into a busy lab and say, here, let's teach them from the ground up. So I'm going to do most of the front loading as much as I can with me in that clinic. So when students step into our rural hospitals or other partner sites, they're already understanding the safety, basic workflows, simple testing, and the fundamentals behind the moderate complexity procedures. And they're going to be under a clear structure. So it feels more like support for our lab staff and not extra stress.
Okay, and when it comes to this, and by now you can have kind of answer my questions. You talk about the what they're doing and things like that. So when they come out of this program, do they get like any certification or anything?
Yeah, they will be able to sit for the Certified Medical Laboratory Assistant certification exam through American Medical Technologist.
Okay, perfect. Right, training students. It's definitely as teaching hospitals is something that we do, and personally I do enjoy it. But there is that challenge, right? That you are. It's not like the clock stops and you are working your bench while you're training a student, and that's already time consuming. So it definitely helps with the student already has some knowledge. Okay. Anything else? I guess I was going to ask you about how do you take that idea and turn it into something that could be implemented in high school. I mean, you kind of talk about that. Anything else that you can add?
Honestly, like one of my friends have always joked that I was too stubborn to stop, and I just kept going and asking. I think we need to do this. This will help our pipeline and our healthcare. And so I started asking everybody in our area that was in healthcare what they thought. I mean, I went to our pharmacists, our occupational therapists, speech therapists. I went to like everybody, and they were like, "Yes, let's do something." And then I ran into one of this girl that probably inspired me to keep going. I call her a rural generalist, Joni McDonald. She graduated from Canton. She never went to college or career tech. She started as a front desk in a clinic, and she just kept adding skills: phlebotomy, rooming patients, scheduling, billing, until basically she's like our Swiss Army knife medical assistant for our community. But to me, she proved that we could build a healthcare career for any high school students right here at home, and they don't have to go anywhere. And so I floated the idea and said, like, what if we built this for our high school students? And I think that's really what gave me the courage is I had all of the support from all of the healthcare community. And that's when I went to the high school and asked our principal, Marissa Evans, and counselor Don Heath. I was like, I really think this is possible. And they would give me pushbacks the best way that they could. I mean, and I wanted them. And so they give me the list of pushbacks, and I'd come back and say, okay, well, what if we did it this way? And I think that's where I took the real idea and made it into a year-long clinical laboratory assistant course that juniors and seniors can count on their class on their transcript and put it in the schedule.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that with us. And so it is a year long.
Yes.
Okay. And this is just done in addition to what they're required, of course, to is it like an elective, I'm guessing, right?
It's like elective, but they're able to count it as a lab science, and they're actually going to, I think we're going to be able to make it as a math too with statistics.
Oh, nice. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have any long-term vision for this, for this kind of program, especially in rural community settings?
Yeah, I mean, my long-term vision is much bigger than this one classroom in Canton. Locally, I want Canton's program to become a steady, reliable pipeline for our facilities. Places like Okeen and Fairview and any other rural partners that want to grow their own people. I mean, I'd love to see that rhythm where every year a few students graduate with enough lab foundation to step into assistant roles, get their foot in the door, and either stay or bridge into an MLT or MLS program later on. And then zooming out, I mean, I think my dream for Canton is to become a blueprint for other small towns. I mean, the model is simple. We have a small public high school, one rural hospital, one local clinic, and one lab professional who's willing to teach. I mean, not every community has a career tech campus, but a lot of them have those three ingredients. I mean, I would love to help other districts adapt what we're doing, tweak the curriculum, plug it into their own partners, and see what we can come up with. But even beyond the lab, I see this as a way to raise the baseline for all rural healthcare. I mean, if a student takes this class and ends up in nursing, radiology, or become a physician's assistant, they're going to walk in with a deep understanding of diagnostics, infection control, and what the tube of blood really represents. And that changes how they practice and how they value the lab. I mean, long term, I want rural kids to stay in their community working in healthcare and be well trained as a proud, intentional choice, not something that they have to settle for just because they didn't have other options.
And I'm gonna backtrack a little bit, but you know, as I was listening to you, you mentioned the analyzers. Can you talk a little bit more about what type of analyzers they're working with, so the audience gets an idea?
So one of the analyzers I have is this the Siemens Clinitech, and then I have the Siemens DCA. It does microalbumin and A1Cs. And then I Sophia's, those where they do the flu, COVID, and strep. They're not fancy, but my goal is to have them do as much as they can in the clinic, and then I'm gonna take them to the hospital, and they'll be working on a Vitros 5600 and a Sysmex.
Perfect. And you mentioned one microscope, so they're doing what kind of slide training are they doing?
I'm gonna teach them the normal how to do normal differentials.
Anything on the micro side?
We will that has been a work in progress because we start this program in August 2026. And I am bringing micro in. It's gonna be very small. They're gonna know gram stains and just the basics of micro. We're not gonna go in depth. That they're gonna learn how to streak, how to read those gram stains, and I'm gonna teach them the basics like Staph aureus, E. coli, the normal ones that they can understand.
Yeah, yeah, that'll be good to get some of those basic concepts. That's good. Um, you mentioned your idea and how you kind of put it into place. Was this challenging to from the moment that you thought, okay, I'm gonna do this to get it in place? Was it hard?
I really don't think it was because it's just a small series of steps. Like I said, I talked to everybody in my hometown. It's like, I really think we need this. We don't have enough science. Our students are going. I was seeing at the university that the small rural students wasn't as up to speed as maybe the metro school students. I was like, I think this would just help us out. And then when I really thought about, they don't have to stay in the lab, but if they have that lab foundation, I mean, they're going to be head and shoulders above their peers. And to me, like, putting this program in place really hasn't been that hard. It's just we had to get all the puzzle pieces. We had to get the hospital administration in, the school administration in, and then you have the frontline healthcare people in, and we just put the pieces together and figured out how to make it work.
Okay. And one something that I was thinking, so you said, so they start doing things, in school, and at some point they go to a hospital. Is that what you mentioned, that they get to see more analyzers? So
Yes, they'll see more analyzers when I take them out to the hospital.
okay, so that's part of the program. So they get like some time in the hospital.
Yes. It's like a clinical rotation in the hospital, basically.
All right, makes sense. As we come to an end, do you have any closing thoughts on this? Perhaps any advice if anyone is thinking about doing something like this, or has an idea and they haven't fully seen how they can, materialize it. So any closing thoughts, perhaps any advice?
I think just being willing to open your doors to students, whether it's just shadowing or to give them a tour of the lab or a structured rotation. I think if you're in the lab, clinic, or any allied health role in the rural area, you could be the first to say yes and show students what's possible. And if you want to build a pipeline, you just got to start and not be scared to ask questions and just keep pushing and be stubborn.
Definitely. Okay, Kenzie, this question I like to ask it, and I know that normally, a lot of people that I have here in this podcast, they're full on microbiologists or like ID docs or pharmacists. But I know that you have, you're teaching, you have done micro and you teach other areas, so you are definitely, you have been immersed in the micro world, and so we all tend to have this favorite bug, either or least favorite for a number of reasons. Could be, we work with it in school, could be the way it looks on the plate, could be a mechanism, many reasons. We all tend to have that favorite bug. What is your favorite bug?
I feel like my favorite bug's kind of lame, but it's E. coli, because on a McConkey plate, it turns that nice pink, and it's usually pretty straightforward to identify. And it's such an easy organism to use when you're teaching students how to read plates and think about lactose fermenters. It's simple, visual. It's just a great starting point for showing how much information you can get just from how something grows on a plate.
I love that, and yeah, it's a great reason to like it. I mean, and I mentioned this before. Mine is pastorella, and I love it because it doesn't grow. Most of them don't grow mac, and makes you think about media, and don't assume that because it's McConkey negative, it's a gram positive, and so it really gets you thinking and the biochemicals. So yeah, it's classic E. coli with that beautiful non-mucoid lactose fermenter. It's very visually appealing, and definitely, yeah, one of the best plates to start teaching students. So I like that. Okay. Well, Kenzie, thank you so much for first for what you're doing for our profession. You definitely have done a lot from trying to recruit people, now getting this program going. So I definitely appreciate it, and I'm sure the audience does as well. There's many ways that we can try to make this profession better, and you're definitely doing it out there. So on behalf of myself, Let's Talk Micro and the MLS community, thank you so much, and definitely a pleasure having you here on Let's Talk Micro. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. This is really exciting for me.
My pleasure. Well, friends, that was the episode. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, I enjoy sharing this information with you. It is great when people try to make this profession better. So, once again, shout out to Kenzie. And as always, you can find Let's Talk Micro on any podcast platform. So if you go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Goodpods, we're right there. So please subscribe to the podcast, download episodes, and if the app allows you to do so, please leave a review. Thank you so much for the support. You can find us on socials on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky Social as Let's Talk Micro, X as Let's Talk Micro 1, LinkedIn as Luis Plaza, and there's an email address which is Let's Talk Micro at outlook.com and a website, letstalkmicro.com. In the website, you can find information about licensing, training, episode updates, and more. And of course, if you have any feedback, any suggestions, you can reach out via social media, via email, via the website. They are always welcome and appreciated. If you want to support us in any way, you can do so via Venmo or via Buy Me a Coffee, KOFI, both links available on the show notes. And one thing that I'm very excited about, and stay tuned via social media, I will be posting more about this. But if you're attending ASM Microbe this year in Washington, D.C., on June 6th at 3 p.m., there will be a live episode of Let's Talk Micro. And it will be taking place on the ASM stage. So if you're attending, and if you attended before, you know that the ASM stage, they do talks, they do podcasts. So on June 6th at 3 p.m. Eastern, there will be a live episode of Let's Talk Micro. So stay tuned for more details. Hey, if you're a member of the infectious diseases microbiology community, you know that learning about antibiotics can be very difficult. So if you're looking to learn more about antibiotics, please check out www.learnantibiotics.com and the Learn Antibiotics book available on Amazon. These resources include cheat sheets, practice tests, games, and more, and they are being used by thousands of people worldwide and may be helpful for you or your colleagues. And these are some great resources from Dr. Timothy Gauthier, a very passionate pharmacist. And as you know, the Let's Talk Micro podcast is supported by the American Society for Microbiology. To learn more about microbes, visit asm.org. And that, micro friends, it's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoy learning about this program. As always, I enjoy sharing this information with you. And like I said, I'm so excited. If you're attending Microbe this year, June 6th at 3 p.m., there will be a live episode of Let's Talk Micro. So I hope to see you there. So please continue bringing that passion to what you do. It's so important. You do such great work. Thank you for the support. I'm always grateful. And please stay motivated, stay safe, and of course, continue talking micro. Until the next time. Bye.